Welcome to Intelligence Squared. I'm Stephanie Hare. Our guest today is Carl Öhman. He's an assistant professor of political science at Uppsala University in Sweden. His research spans several topics, including the politics and ethics of AI, deepfakes, and digital remains. Today, we'll be discussing his book, The Afterlife of Data: What Happens to Your Information When You Die and Why You Should Care, which was named one of the Economist best books of 2024. Welcome to Intelligence Squared, Carl. So I'm desperate to hear a little bit about your research background and how this led to the book that you wrote that we're about to discuss.
So I often describe myself as a kind of disciplinary orphan in academia. I started out in comparative literature, and then I did a second, like a double major degree in sociology. And then I came to the UK, and I started studying at Oxford at a place called the Oxford Internet Institute, which is this interdisciplinary environment where people from all around academia come together to study the internet. So the degree I got for my master's is literally called Master of the Social Science of the Internet, shorthand Master of the Internet. And then my PhD was in information communication in the social sciences. So interdisciplinary studies of the internet and digital technology, that would be my background.
And when did you get interested in death? To go right into the awkward, death is something that, particularly given your time here in the UK, you will notice that we avoid talking about it as much as possible. It's awkward. It makes people feel uncomfortable. We really put it away. You go right to the heart of the matter. So how did you get interested in this?
Surprisingly, perhaps, from comparative literature. When I was a literature student, I heard about, and this is back in like 2014, I heard about these AI applications where you could feed an entire corpus of text into this algorithm, and it would start reproducing text in the same style as the author. So you could hypothetically take all of Fyodor Dostoevsky's novels and you would run them through the machine and it would spit out another Dostoevsky novel. And that got me really interested in what would be the relationship between that new novel and what Dostoevsky produced during his life. And that, coupled with when I started studying the internet during my master's, I realized that, oh, hang on, this is not only possible for art and literature. What if there was an entire digital footprint of a person? Could this be done also with your social media data, with your search data, with every kind of digital trace that you're producing? So I became interested in what would be the relationship between a person and the data that they leave behind upon death. So I wish I had a more like personal answer of like, oh, someone close to me died, and that made me realize so and so. But I really came at this from a philosophical angle. It poked my interest as a scholar, and then I realized that, oh, there are so many layers to this. It's not only the ethics and the philosophy, but it's also the political economy of this entire phenomenon. Who owns that data and who decides what's going to happen to it, and so on.
I mean, I'm relieved that this wasn't inspired by some terrible tragedy.
So am I, of course.
It comes from a more philosophical and scholarly bent. And I think one of the things that your book prompted for me, I mean, so many questions, like where to even start, was I was thinking that weirdly Elon Musk was warning just a couple of weeks ago that we're running out of data, right? There's this whole myth or argument rather in AI that we're running out of data. And what is the answer to that? Is it synthetic data? Is that even true? And as an historian, I was like, what is he talking about? There's all sorts of data that has like not even been cataloged and structured properly, much less being used. There's data all over the world. We have not even begun to mine all the sources. If you spend time in an archive, you also know this. And then your book made me take it to the next level of, okay, there's actually all the data of everyone who's ever existed on Earth that we have. There's a bunch of people who obviously have existed on Earth that we don't have their data for, but there's a bunch of people who left their traces behind. And then what you were thinking about in your book of the future, that we can actually start to organize data, from now going forward to build out a more sort of responsible, ethical, legal, mindful way of thinking about the data of the future dead. You and I are having this conversation now in 2025. So imagine that we fast forward to 100 years from now. Between now and then, how many people will have died and left a huge digital footprint? It sounds like, oh wow, the data is limitless, but at the same time, it isn't structured properly. So is it useful? So I wanted to just kind of tease that out with you a bit to think, how did you go from thinking about that question of, do we have enough data? What does it mean to think about the corpus of data, the corpus of work and text, to the corpse of human bodies, our physical data, but also our digital remains that we leave all over the internet?
So one of the first things I realized when I started researching this topic for my PhD was this myth of the eternity of the internet. We tend to think about the internet as this kind of ephemeral space, this almost like immaterial space beyond the world, where you can just dump data and it will just stay there somehow magically. And it's even to the extent, like when the book was about to be released, the marketing team from my publisher suggested that the title would be Forever Online. And I was like, but my point is that nothing is forever online. It's only going to be there so long as somebody is paying for it. So when we get to the question of, do we have enough data? Well, what kind of data would be my follow-up question? Because we are deleting heaps of data every day. We produce far, far more data than we can possibly manage. And this is only growing. So sooner or later, someone's data is going to have to be deleted. And I think an illustrating case here is Facebook. So I led a study in 2019 on where we predicted, based on really good data, the number of dead profiles on Facebook, or how many profiles in each year of the 21st century are going to belong to dead people on Facebook. And it turns out that somewhere around the mid to late 2060s or 70s, it's a fair chance that there are going to be more dead than alive users on Facebook. Why does this matter? Well, it matters because the entire business model of the platform is based on users clicking on ads. But dead people don't click on any ads. They are not consumers. Nevertheless, they take up a lot of server space, and those data centers are going to have to be managed. And to be clear, the problem here is actually not storage. Storage is cheap. The problem is accessibility, of keeping the file formats updated and making sure that it's updated with the latest hardware and so on. And in facing that question of, okay, so what do we do with these billions of accounts that are just laying around here and not really being economically productive? Facebook is going to have to face the question, which accounts do we delete? Which profiles do we not consider to be worthy of preserving for posterity? And for a for-profit company, of course, the answer to that question is, which data can we make money on? So when we talk about, do we have enough data? How are these data going to accumulate over the 21st century? It's all about what a handful of companies are going to find worthwhile preserving for posterity.
And there's something very interesting in what you said there, like the fragility of the internet. And, many of us who are of a certain age may have been online in the late 90s or even early 2000s, and the sites that we were on as young people are gone.
Yeah.
So And everybody knows what that's like, where all of a sudden like a photo sharing site that maybe you used or for your art or whatever is down. I have a personal website, and you're right, if I don't pay to keep that going, it will just disappear. I mean, I guess there's things like the Wayback Machine, we could talk about that as well, but it's surprising how, Skype is about to disappear. Like, we forget that
Yeah.
these companies are not like laws of physics. There are things that could come and go, and frequently will. By contrast, when we think of things that many humans have left behind, you can look at archaeology, you can go to any museum or go to many sites around the world, and those physical objects, many of them still exist. And
Mhm.
that made me wonder about, what are future historians and social scientists going to be able to learn about our time, specifically because of what you just said, that stuff disappears, but also things are not necessarily translated into the latest format. You might have had vinyl records and you moved to CDs and tapes, and now you're on, Spotify. But when does Spotify go? It's like, you know what I mean? It's all,
Yeah.
we're using stuff that we think is really convenient and flexible and it exists, in the ether, but it could also just all disappear.
Yeah.
So what does that mean for future historians and social scientists who want to understand us now in this moment that we're living in?
So, I mean, that's a question with many answers, but it's a real thing that archivists are talking about, what they call a digital dark ages, where we think about digital information as being so secure, as you're pointing out, but but the hard truth is that in only a couple of decades from now, if we continue this very short-sighted uh, style of data management, it's not unlikely that we'll actually, or that generation will actually be quite oblivious about their digital past. I think that is true, but there are even more scary aspects of that. My biggest fear is not necessarily that we will lose historical archives, but rather that these archives will be dominated by a handful of tech giants who are going to use them for economic but also political gain. So one of the examples that I bring up in the book, where I talk about this privatization of our collective digital past through our digital remains, is former Twitter, now X, and the Me Too campaign. So the Me Too movement was arguably one of the most important events of early 21st century, especially when it comes to women's rights. And it's a global movement with millions of testimonies from women all around the world. Now, of course, future historians are going to want to study what happened, how did it spread, what kind of testimonies, what were people witnessing it about. Now, that access to this very important part of our history is going to be gate kept by one individual, and that individual is Elon Musk. So Elon Musk is going to decide in the future who gets to study our collective digital past. And that's a very, like, even if Elon Musk was a saint, which he is not, that would have been a very scary and an unstable development. And I'm using the Me Too movement as an example here, but any major event from the Arab Spring to the Black Lives Matter movement to, I could keep listing these really important events. The history about these events is privately owned by the Zuckerbergs and the Musks of the world. And that's a very dangerous development because they are going to use it and they are going to restrain the kinds of usage of that data.
It reminds me also of like YouTube taking down videos of human rights violations in certain areas of the world where there's massive conflict because it was violating their terms and
Yeah.
conditions. People were saying, we're uploading these, we're bearing testimony to human rights abuses and war crimes and genocide. And these could actually be like admitted in a court of law to hold people to account, but you're taking them down and
Yeah.
realizing that, what you're talking about, the sort of dominance of certain tech platforms, the lack of competition, like really viable competition in this space, and what it means to be resilient in this day and age about our data. So you maybe don't want to have it all with the Magnificent Seven, the American tech giants. Are you going to want it with a Chinese tech giant? Probably not. Like even worse on censorship, right? So like, where is this third space? Is everybody having to have their own Substack or their own, again, American company, their own personal websites? Is that a scalable model for this? Should it be the state, right? Like, should it be a certain country's government that does it? But then governments, particularly in liberal democracies, can elect authoritarians who decide to get rid of stuff anyhow, as is happening in the United States, where we're deleting data sets massively, right, that were public. So as you're thinking about that and watching it, are you seeing any paths forward to safeguard data and make us more resilient?
So, I mean, there are plenty of promising solutions. Tim Berners-Lee, who, well, basically invented what we understand to be the internet, but the World Wide Web, is working on some really interesting solutions that lets individuals be in control of their data to a completely different extent than they are today. And I'm all for these kinds of solutions, and they're good and worthy, but they are not the full answer. And they're especially not the answer when it comes to the accumulated digital past and our digital remains. Because any solution that gives the individual the power over their own data, sure, that's great, but there are already hundreds of millions of dead internet users. What about them? And even if you're trying to get one of these savvy tech solutions where you own your own data through fiduciaries and so on, even if you manage to get, let's say, a huge percentage of the population of the internet to adopt those, let's say even 20%, that's nothing on a global scale. I mean, nothing. And it will certainly not do much for the accumulation of digital remains. So whatever solution we settle upon for the management of our digital past is going to have to be a collective solution. We're going to have to say, okay, these are the principles by which the data of the dead are safeguarded. These are the kinds of organizations and the principles that we think are good for the management of the digital past. And I'm not in the book. I'm not promoting any single solution to that. I'm not saying that there should be state ownership. I'm not saying that this or that UN body or organization is going to assume control over the digital past, but rather that we need a plurality of principles and organizations to manage our digital past. And a good comparison here would be information about World War II. So where is the information about World War II? It's everywhere. Thousands of museums and archives and records and photos spread everywhere. So there's no single actor who can control the narrative of that event or series of events. Whereas when it comes to events that are taking place today, it's almost the opposite. Sure, they can be journalists and media reportings about something that happened, but that is nothing compared to hundreds of thousands of text messages or geodata from phones, or having direct access to exactly what kind of news an entire population were consuming at a certain event and so on. So the real valuable historical records are today, sadly, controlled by these handful of tech giants.
So this made me think, first of all, who is this book for? Are you writing this as an alarm, to say this is a problem that you've spotted and you would like certain people to have this on their radar and start thinking about it? Do you want the public to be thinking about it, policymakers? Because I read it with great interest and I thought, you're sketching out the problem and you're doing that so articulately here. Who would be your ideal readership and what change are you hoping to see?
So the book is intended to be read really by anyone who has an interest in these questions. I think it's my former mentor, Luciano Floridi, who provided one of the blurbs on the backside, is saying that it will be of interest to any mortal with a digital presence, which is like anyone. But it's a call for people to consider what happens to their data when they die, not solely as consumers, but as citizens. So I commonly get this question from journalists, like, okay, so but what can our listeners do to protect their digital legacy? And of course, I have advice for that, and that's also in the book. But I think my most important advice is to say that try to think of this question not only as a matter of your individual privacy, but rather as a citizen leaving a certain kind of society behind. So when you
Mm.
leave your data behind upon death, and you may say, like, I don't care what happens to it. Like, I'm going to be dead anyway, so who cares if someone goes through my WhatsApp messages or my search history or whatever? Sure, but you may care about the society that you leave behind. And if you don't do anything about your digital legacy, you're basically giving a free present to Musk and Zuckerberg, provided you're using one of their platforms, or to Google, or whichever company owns your data. And that is a question that will have massive impact on your peers and potentially even on your immediate family. So
Mhm.
one of the examples that I'm drawing on in the book is biodata. Tens of millions of people, perhaps hundreds of millions of people, have uploaded their DNA to ancestry sites for genealogy research. And it's fun doing that. And you're like, oh, turns out I'm like 7% Irish. But the thing is, when you die, you will have zero rights over these data, and you have no way to control where they go and what happens to them. And you may trust the company. Let's say that you uploaded your stuff to 23andMe or something like that. Um, but guess what? That company won't be around forever either. And what's going to happen when they go bust? Well, the same thing that happens when every company goes out of business. Their assets are going to be auctioned out to the highest bidder, which means that your data, both your social data, but also your genomic data, may be auctioned out to the highest bidder, who can do whatever they want with that data, by the way, because you're dead, so you don't have any data privacy rights. And that can, of
Mm.
course, be used to uh, draw inferences about your immediate family, because that company may not have any information about them, but if they own their dead parents and siblings and so on, all of a sudden that can be used to make predictions about their health, or their,
Mm.
what their credit score. And so you may not care about what happens to your data, but you should care about the society you live in, and your immediate family and next of kin.
That was something that brought me up short while reading your book, because the dead have no privacy rights. And I was like, my God, that's hardcore. And I didn't know that. And I thought, is that something that you'd like to see changed? First of all, like, is one of the outcomes that you might hope in this book is a bunch of lawmakers read it and are like, my God, we've got to close this loophole. Let's actually pass some, laws. We have regulation on the books saying, yeah, you might have or given your data to 23andMe, and if they go out of business, like, they can't sell that data on, like, it gets destroyed. And it also made me think, I don't know if it's good to put the onus on all of us individuals that we have to go around and delete all of the data or have a digital
Mm.
will in place for everything that we've ever had online, or if it should actually be on the onus of anyone who's storing people's data. And this is maybe a use for AI, if that data account becomes inactive over a period of time, or if you're able to upload when somebody dies to a register that then goes out everyone internet that this human being has left the earth, and everybody's got to nuke their data,
Mm.
because I wouldn't even know where to start in nuking my data. And I'm one of these people that would love to leave no trace. Like, I
Mm.
don't care about being part of the collective vibe. Like, my work is my legacy, but my personal data, I would love that just to be gone. But I thought, how would I do that? And also, how do I check that they've done it?
Yeah.
I deleted my Facebook account back in 2016 after they were selling data and being really naughty with Cambridge Analytica. They say that they've deleted it, but I can't audit that. I don't know, So I was thinking as I was reading your book, do you want this to be something that all of us have to add to our personal to-do list, like come up with a will and figure out all this stuff, which, we know is not going to happen, frankly, even if people could do it. I think that's a big friction point. Or do you want to see a legal requirement out there for organizations to do it?
I certainly want to see more legal requirements. I think that, like, in the GDPR explicitly states that your data protection rights cease upon death, and I think that it would be a good thing to include dead people, like not to grant dead people the exact same kinds of rights that the living are granted through the GDPR, but analog rights, at least, some basic level of protection. Like, for me, it's crazy that like, if a company goes bust, even if they have hundreds of thousands or millions of dead people on their servers, like, they can do whatever they want with it. And I'm like, how is that possible? And I often get that question from when I do media. People are like, but why? Like, why don't the dead have any data privacy rights? And my answer is that, well, the dead don't have very strong lobbying groups in Brussels. But
And
no
also,
one.
everybody's so uncomfortable talking about death. Most people, how many people walking around, they don't even have a will for themselves,
Yeah.
much less they're thinking about how could my data be used? Does Mark Zuckerberg want to turn me into a slave on one of his metaverse farms in 20 years' time? Or every woman that's on the internet could just become an object of deepfake porn after their death, because there's literally no right. Not that we have any rights now, by the way, take that stuff down while we're alive. There really would be no leg to stand on, so to speak. You're taking dead women's profiles.
Yeah.
Who's going to fight for that? It's so gross. So I loved your book with this, because I was like, he's going there. He's going to, like, he's making us all go to the place that most of us don't want to think about. We're in a bit of denial.
Yeah.
Lawmakers don't want to, because there's no voting
Yeah.
rights in it, right? It's kind of, everybody, I could just see business and be like, oh, this is like another cost for us. But
Yep.
you talk about this in such a fascinating way, and it made me really think about also the role of archivists and librarians and people who over time have had to, they're constantly having to organize this ever expanding corpus, if you will, of information, and keep up with all the formatting changes, etc. Talk to me about the role of these, like, unsung heroes who keep our knowledge stewarded and accessible for all of us, and, like, can we draw on their expertise to help us out here?
Yeah. I think your question highlights an interesting point about the entire tech discourse, which is that it's either very short term focused. It's about, like, what's going to be the next blockchain breakthrough, or what's AI going to be doing in 5 years, or it's absurdly long term. It's like, but what if AI in 100 years destroys humanity? But the questions that are, like, 2 or 3 decades ahead of us tend to be forgotten. And I think there are two reasons for that. The one is that the industry is not interested in things happening 2 or 3 decades from now, because it's vain to do any kind of investments that long term. And policymakers aren't really interested either, because politics runs on a 4 or 5 year cycle where you want to be reelected. So you're going to have to deliver results on a short horizon. It's not like we're saying, oh, I'm going to vote for this party because they made some really good choices 25 years ago that have paid off now. So both the industry and politics runs on these very short-term cycles. Whereas librarians and archivists, they're concerned with the long term. And there are really good things happening from that community. There's, of course, the Internet Archive, who are doing a very, very important job. Uh, the Wikimedia Foundation, who are doing an amazing job in just preserving human knowledge and expanding it to more and more languages. UNESCO has a number of really interesting initiatives on software heritage and trying to preserve software for the future. But these are on the fringes. They're not really part of the bigger battles about the really valuable data, the personal data, the stuff that connects the private with the collective and the political. So it's almost like we've surrendered the parts that tell the really interesting history about the past, probably because there are really difficult lines of conflict here. So sure, we all recognize that an archive like Facebook has a massive historical value. Of course, like imagine if we would have had access to that granularity of data on, say, Germany in the 30s. Like the historical insights would have been massive. Or if we could have read the WhatsApp messages from Napoleon and his private conversations with the officers the night before battle. I mean that would have been an amazing, both on a collective level and individual level, an amazing historical asset. Uh, and it's not like that asset doesn't exist. And we realize that there are conflicts here um, between the privacy of the dead and the historical value. But I don't think that is a sufficient reason to just completely capitulate these questions to big tech. It's almost like, oh, like as long as the state doesn't do it, it's fine.
Mm.
And we have a good and healthy precaution for state dominance when it comes to control of the past. We've all read George Orwell's 1984, and we know that whoever controls the past controls the future and so forth. But when this discourse was born, it's as if we couldn't imagine a a bigger data controller than a state, where like a state is like the peak of a data controller. But now it's a different kind of organization that we got to keep an eye out for, which is not states but multinational tech corporations who vastly outsize states when it comes to data control. But we're still very focused on like, oh, let's make sure that the state doesn't have too much data about its citizens. Let's outsource that to some companies that do not have our best interests in mind, nor any long-term incentives to do the right things.